I think, to me, the magic of plein-air painting is in the relationship between the artist and their environment. It's not so much about the painting itself, but about being present in the moment. Just detaching from the rest of the world and truly taking in a space for what it is. It gives you time to appreciate and reflect and time to breathe. It's too easy, especially in today's world, to get caught up in the bustle and forget the beauty, because it is beautiful, and painting in nature gives me the opportunity to remember that. Once you start painting outdoors, you start to see the world a little bit differently. Start noticing the nuances that you normally would overlook. And once you learn to appreciate a rock or a branch, suddenly everything is something worth admiring. And I think that's what makes it worth doing.
Hi, I'm Alex Foltz. Today we're in Montgomery, Vermont, and I'm going to be painting a creek scene. This is a much tighter, more intimate scene than other scenes you might do. For example, like a wider landscape. This is going to be something more close up, a little more busy, a little more chaotic. So the goal with this painting today is to simplify things as much as we can and still retain that feeling of the natural noise that we're seeing here. We've got a really nice rock outcropping, catching the full light. That'll make a nice focal point, and plenty of dark shadows around it that will kind of draw the eye in towards that. So again, we're going to be working with a limited palette of burnt umber, cadmium yellow pale or cadmium yellow light, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and titanium white. I always encourage working with a limited palette if you can, to help kind of learn how to mix your colors from scratch. It's always good to know how to do that. You might notice that my tube of white is actually bigger than any of the other tubes that I have. White is typically the color that you'll end up going through the most. Most of your brighter colors are going to have a touch of white in them, so if you're going to go extra on one color, make sure it's the white. So the very first thing we want to do is tone the canvas so that we're not staring at a bright white space. It'll make it a little easier to judge the colors that you're mixing, and it also gives you a little bit of color that can show through in the final painting and add some interest. I tend to like to tone my canvases with a warm color, because I like the undertones that it gives in the painting. But you could really do any color you want. Could be blue, whatever accent color you think would serve the painting best. And if you're going to be out in direct sunlight, maybe bring a hat. Save your face from getting too burnt up. Okay. Now that I've got the canvas toned, I'm going to start kind of laying out my underpainting. So an underpainting is really just a sketch that you're going to work on top of, and it'll help you establish all of your shapes and maybe your lights and darks as well. Really, at this point in the process, I'm not looking to get any sort of detail or anything like that in. I just want markers on my canvas so I know where I'm planning on putting all of the elements in the painting. And I really don't need much, just enough to give me an idea. And if in your underpainting you want to kind of show where the light is hitting the brightest, you can take a little bit of your mineral spirits on your brush and kind of scrub it into those brightest areas and wipe it away to get a nice spot of bright white. With this scene, I really want all of these shadow areas to be the right value in order to kind of draw the eye in towards where the sunlight is hitting. But because it's trees, I also want it to look complicated. We don't have a lot of time to do that, so a good way to add fake detail is to do sort of a transparent scrub. So I'm going to add mineral spirits to my paint until it's nice and flowy. And then I'm just going to scrub the brush in all sorts of different directions. Just trying to introduce a little bit of chaos into this brushwork. And it will help give the impression that we're looking at pine needles and leaves and things like that. And the key with nature scenes is that you don't want anything to look too uniform or too perfect. So another thing I'm going to do as I work is mix slightly different versions of the same color and alternate between them to add a little bit of randomness and variation. It's helpful in oil painting to work from light to dark. It's always easier to add a light color over the top of a dark color. But you can also thin down your dark colors quite a bit with mineral spirits in those beginning stages, and they will become a little dry and a little easier to work on top of as the painting goes along. Just something that you can't really achieve as well with your light colors. Sort of the natural instinct when you're painting water is to lean it towards blue. Truthfully, most water is green. And if you're gonna paint water, you wanna make sure that that green comes through if you want it to look natural. And the water I'm looking at now is actually a very similar green to the green of the trees. So I'm just gonna keep using that same color as I work my way down into the water. And the other interesting thing about water is that where you're not getting a bright reflection on the surface of the water, you're actually going to be able to see down into it. So any area that doesn't have that bright reflection, you'll be able to see what's on the bottom of the water and the color of the actual water itself. be, dude. There's no way. That's better. So the closer you can match a color that you're mixing to what you're actually seeing in real life, the more realistic your painting is going to look. And a good way to do that is to just load your brush up with whatever color and hold it out and directly compare it to the color you're trying to mix. And then you can kind of say from there, is my color too light or is it too dark? Maybe it's a little too blue or too yellow. And how can I add more paint to sort of counteract that and get it closer to where I want it to be? And again, even in the rocks, I'm using that same sort of scrubbing technique to get some interesting texture in there that just a brush loaded with paint wouldn't be able to get you. Part of the name of the game with plein air painting is that your light is going to change on you really quick. That can be tough to deal with, but it also gives you opportunities. As your light changes, you'll see different things that kind of catch your interest, and it gives you the opportunity to grab onto those things and put them in your painting. Now that we've got most of our dark areas established, I'll come in and start marking in my brighter colors. This isn't necessarily how I want it to to look when it's finished. It's just kind of an indicator that I can follow. It tells me how bright and roughly what color I want an area of the painting to be. One of the things I'm paying close attention to here are my edges. Now with this rock, for example, I want this part of it to have a nice sharp edge so we can tell that that's where the end of the rock is. While over here, it's being cast in the shadow of a tree. So I'm going to make these edges a lot softer so that we can kind of tell that that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a shadow being cast on the rock versus the edge of the rock itself. If all of your shadows are equally soft or equally sharp, it makes it much harder to distinguish where that shadow is coming from and why it's there in the first place. We'll see that same light area of the rock reflected in the water. But if you look closely, you'll see that most of your reflections that show up in water are actually darker and greener than the thing that they are reflecting. That's something I want to make sure that I capture in the painting. You might look at something like that and say, well, then, you know, I can tell it's water, but it doesn't quite look like water. Here is a fun trick. As long as you're working in oils and your paint is still wet, you can just give a rough approximation of your reflections, then come in with a smaller brush like this one and just sweep it back and forth. And that will immediately give you the ripples that make it look like water. I'll show you what I mean. And this is just a dry brush, there's nothing on it. I'm just pushing around the paint that's already there. And just like that, in a couple very simple strokes, now we have a rippling water effect. Don't forget to stand back every once in a while. And shut up every once in a while. Dang, I'm liking this a lot. This is a good one. Okay, cool. The last thing I want to add in, just as to sort of block in my general idea of the painting, is where the light is hitting the leaves of this tree. And it's really up to you how far you want to take a painting. The This will probably this will probably be a point where I could say, I like it here, and I'm done with it. I'll definitely take it to a higher level of detail, but there's nothing wrong with making a simple statement and saying that's enough. One of the things I'm doing frequently as I'm working is squinting my eyes. That kind of helps knock back the details and lets you see the image as a whole, all the simple shapes and colors that you're working with. It's important to make sure that your simple shapes and colors are correct, because that's really what's going to make your scene look the way it's supposed to. The details just add flair. That was a quick 45 minutes. And again, I'm paying attention to my edges here. A hard edge will show that that's where something ends, and a soft edge will show that it's receding away into the shadows. Adding white to almost any color has a tendency to make it less saturated and less vibrant. It's definitely necessary to add white when you need it, but I try to be as sparing with it as I can so that I can keep the deepest, most saturated colors that I can manage in my paintings. Now I just want to come in and add a little bit more texture to this rock face here. I've got a lighter color. I'm just going to let my brush kind of skitter along the surface of the painting. Again, when we're dealing with rocks and trees, we don't want anything to feel too uniform or perfect. So I'm going to let my brush kind of do its own thing here. All right. And to sort of punch up the depth of these trees here, I'm going to mix a little black using my ultramarine blue and my alizarin crimson, maybe a touch of the burnt umber, and kind of fill in some of the deepest, darkest shadows in there. I'm also going to paint these shadows with long and patchy brush strokes to try and indicate that there are sticks and branches back there. And here we can leave a space for a tree trunk coming up through those leaves. It's easy to get carried away and overdo an effect like this. So you want to be careful to only use it as much as you need. If you do too much of any one little trick, it starts to lose its luster. oftentimes whenever you have one object that kind of meets up with another, there'll be a nice dark shadow between the two of them. And if you keep your eye out for that and include it in the painting, it can add a lot. There's a couple subtle spots in here where the light is actually making its way through the leaves and hitting the tree trunks in here. I always think that's interesting, so I like to make sure to include that as well. I want to be careful about where I pick and choose to put this light. An interesting composition is something you want in every painting, and if you don't have a balance of where your lights and darks are, you risk kind of messing up your composition. So I want to make sure that wherever the light is hitting is sort of complementing the other areas in the painting where the light's also hitting. I think I like this area here because then we have the light concentrated mostly in this sort of diagonal space in the middle of the painting. Just a few vertical strokes of paint here will kind of start to communicate the trunks of these trees and all of these leaves. It doesn't take much, and you don't want to overdo any of it. And for my final touches, I'm going to move on to smaller brushes and even knives at this point to scrape details into the painting. Right now I want to add some of the cracks and striations in the rock. And for that, I want sharp, clean lines, and I want them to be small. And again, I'm only trying to really indicate this. I'm not looking to paint in every detail. It's really easy to push something too far. So once I feel like I've got enough that the viewer can tell that there are some cracks in the rock, that's all I really need. A few more spots in the trees to give a little more texture to them. And as a bit of a final touch, this is better done with a palette knife or a sharper object, but you can scrape small details like branches into the paint. So there's a few spaces out here where I wouldn't mind some branches catching the light. I'll just take my knife here and scrape into the canvas to bring those forward. The nice thing about this is that it gives you a little more control and usually a finer line than you could get with a paintbrush. And with that, I think we can go ahead and sign it and call it done.